Me? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Traditionally, we start our commission meeting with a legislative prayer or thought. We've asked Commissioner Hurst to offer that tonight.
Thanks. I just wanted to mention, as I'm sure many of you have been watching in the news, the horrific storms that have hit the southern half of our country over the past couple of weeks. I have been very saddened by the destruction, and I saw, in some of the reporting, I saw a poster that said, "Humanity first," and these people were going out rescuing people in the Houston area, and it just brought home to me how wonderful humanity can be in the face of destruction. And I just thought that that deserved a moment of notice tonight at our meeting. And I know that if we had a situation like that here in this community, we would have just exactly the same thing going on, and for that I am very grateful. And with that, I'll just offer a word of prayer. Dear kind Father in heaven, we're so grateful for this opportunity to meet together as a community tonight and to discuss and help with things that will beautify and make our community a more beautiful place to live in. We're so grateful for the blessings that we live in this country and the many things that we take for granted. Please bless us that we'll be able to have that inspiration and guidance at this meeting, that we can do those things that will continue to help our community to be a more wonderful place to live. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Very good. Thank you very much, Commissioner. The next item on the agenda is a review and acceptance of the minutes from the August 23rd, 2017 meeting. Because we're running a little bit late, Chair will entertain a motion to postpone review of the minutes until later in the agenda.
Mr. Chair, so moved to postpone the minutes till later in the agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. The first matter on the agenda, and all of a sudden we're back on time. First matter on the commission business agenda is the consideration of a proposed final site plan for the unplatted development at 318 East, 1825 North. The applicant is Kim Samuelson, and turn the time over to staff.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Like you said, this is a final site plan for a previously unplatted piece of development for an accessory garage on this property, and it is also in the hillside overlay. Just to go over a few things from the conceptual that have been dealt with. I provided the list for you here. There were a few additional issues because it is in the hillside overlay in regards to easements and fault lines and drainage and utility plans, and there will need to be a signature from the owner acknowledging the risks of building in this area. All of the things have been dealt with for the most part. The easements have been recorded, and things like fault lines and stuff have been noted on the plan. Still to be accomplished, which can all be determined at building permit, are things like the stormwater pollution prevention plan, the colors. The hillside does have some very limited design guidelines that would have to blend harmoniously with the natural settings of the hillside. The applicant has stated in our meetings with him that he plans on doing so, even though no colors are marked on the plan. And then he will have to pay some development fees and put in a sidewalk when he puts in this barn during the building permit process. So other than that, that's it.
Thank you, Cassie. Questions for staff?
Yeah, as I was reading this, I was reminded of some of the issues that we've seen, I think, in North Salt Lake, and I want to say Layton, with some issues of buildings building on the hillside, and cities being at least sued regarding that. And so this is in a question for number 5 on the recommended motion. and I guess it's for Lisa. Lisa, I'd never heard of this particular item before. Is that something that you feel is sufficient to protect the city from any issue?
Yeah, it's difficult whenever something, natural disaster occurs. The cities are often brought in if they were as part of the approval process. But this is a provision of our code, and I've been told by Mr. Snyder that we do have this form in place. And so when you're building in the hillside, you have to sign this and say, I understand I'm building in the hillside. The other thing that the city does is that we require the developer to pay experts to obtain the geologic survey or other soils reports, et cetera, so that they're relying upon their expert. And then we have our experts look at it just to make sure we're okay, but essentially we're putting the burden on them to satisfy that.
But when a disaster like that happens, there'll be the heavy debate on who's responsible.
Right. And it's a struggle that I think many communities are dealing with, whether to allow people to build and, private property rights, or to the over-regulating issue. It's a balancing of interests.
Thank you. Other questions for staff?
I just had a comment that actually the public utility easements have been approved by the city council, but we have not received a signed easement back from the applicants. So I would like to suggest a change to condition number 7, that the public utility easements shall be and then submitted to the city recorder and recorded with the Davis County recorder prior to the issuance of a building permit. So we have notified the applicant to please come in and sign that so that we can get it recorded, but they have not signed it yet.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions for staff? Not, I don't see Dr. Samuelson here, but if there's somebody here representing the applicant, please, one of you come forward, one at a time. You're both welcome to come forward, but take us, place at the mic and give us any comments you have on the staff report or staff recommendation. We may have some questions for you. And please state your name for the record.
So my name is Chris Samuelson. I'm Kim's son. As far as what he was aware of and what he needed to sign, I don't know if he knew that or not. He's out of town right now. That's why we're here. So if we could just get a list of the things that he has to sign. It sounds like there's 2 things, right?
There's a list of 7 conditions for the approval, and I believe you'll be sent a letter on those requirements.
Okay.
Any comments on those 7 conditions?
Are they the ones that are on the list?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't think he agrees with the sidewalk, but I think we've already made that abundantly clear. Other than that, it sounds like we're ready to move forward. Finally.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Its representative? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This matter has been scheduled for a public hearing. Anyone else wishing to come forward and speak on this matter may do so at this time. Seeing no one coming forward, I'll close the public hearing. Further discussion or questions of the applicant or staff? If not, Chair will entertain a motion.
I hereby make a motion for the Planning Commission to accept the final site plan, the proposed accessory building development for an unplatted parcel that has been combined with home located at 318 East, 1825 North, with directives 1 through 7 as amended by Lisa in the staff report, and suggested reasons for the actions 1 through 5.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Further debate? Hearing none, we'll call for a vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Next matter on the agenda is a consideration of proposed final site plan and conditional use permit for ATV sales, repair, and warehouse at 940 North, 950 West. This has been initiated by Cameron Eggerts, the applicant. And turn the time over to staff.
Okay, thank you. This is their new final site plan. And Moto United was here a few months ago and got their conceptual site plan approved back in January. And in the meantime, it has changed kind of significantly. So that's why in the report I went through most of the same things that you did from you would consider during conceptual because it has changed so much since the original approval a few months ago. So this is the new final site plan, and this, because of a vehicle sales and service use, it also requires a conditional use permit in this site, which is an industrial zone. This is on 950 West and about 950 North, and it'll be going right south of where the approved Parish Lane PDO will be, and across from Hogan Office Construction. So as you can see from the staff report, all of the development standards are good. They are a little under part because of the various amounts of uses on their site. There was some trouble calculating that because there are so many uses in the building. And if you recall from the conceptual, there used to be a lot of display of these vehicles left outside. And now it seems that most of the display and the storage of these vehicles will be inside the building. So that does change parking calculations and use of the building and so forth. So in terms of their architecture, there was some discussion on the materiality of the architecture of the elevations. It says pretty explicitly in our code for industrial zones that the predominant material should be composed of rock, stone, brick, split face, concrete, and similar materials, and that lists the accent materials as well that are acceptable in this zone. And right now their elevations do state that they will have CMU and stone tile. I believe that they wish to change that, but staff would not recommend that they would do so or that they be allowed to do so without a zoning text amendment. They do have a more modern design that they would like to use that might look very nice, but in Corey and I discussing it, we have applied these same, materials and design guidelines throughout the industrial zone, and it wouldn't really be fair to kind of change it like that just for this site. So, because in order to blend in with the surrounding buildings, it should be the same materials.
Right. So I think what's significantly changed is during the conceptual, the plan was to put up the concrete tilled up. And concrete tilled up has been used in the past as the commission is acceptable material to CMU and so forth. They changed their plan in the architectural design and went to a predominantly stucco type building. And we had a discussion with the applicant and the architect. There was discussion on whether they would seek some amendments or some changes to go to that type of architecture. I think that's, if they were to pick and choose, that would be their primary desire. I think the applicants here can address that issue. What you see is a change now. Instead of the concrete tilled up and instead of the predominant use of stucco, they will use the CMU elements required by the industrial zone, so the concrete masonry units. They desire to add some stucco as an accent now rather than the primary material. And then if you go to the east elevation, which is facing the I-15, the original plan a few weeks ago is using a metal product. I think they can describe to you what that metal product it consists of. And that's where we had some discussion. I think that's where they'd like to maintain, and this is the entry to the different dealership doors for the RV sports dealers. The plan you see before you with this submittal is those entry elements would be a stone ceramic tile. And a stone ceramic tile has been used in other buildings in the industrial area. So if we go with that scenario, we believe they would be consistent with what's been approved in the past. But I think what they'd like to have the commission weigh in is the dealership entrance in that metal product. And I think that's something that you have to look at, because there are two terms used in the architectural. It says anodized aluminum and colored metal is allowed, and then you have metal siding is not allowed. And so that's, I think they would prefer, rather than the ceramic tile, to go with the metal product under the colored metal and the anodized aluminum statements. I think that's their preference on that. The metal siding, you know, everything you put up is some type of siding, so it's really hard to say what was intended. What I perceive the code is you galvanize metal siding of the buildings that are in the industrial park. That's what they're really referring to, because those, prominent use of those, running in with forklifts and other things, damage those. They rust, they, you know, don't get repaired, don't last. And so I think that's what they want to weigh in, and I'll let them address their issues. But as submitted to you, we think they meet the intent of the architectural design guidelines. The issue about the metal entrance, I think, is something to discuss with the applicant. You know, the one cautionary is, you know, I think accent materials bring interest to building. Just a straight CMU block is not necessarily a great looking building. It's a maintenance, you know, great for maintenance, but not great for architecture. But I can't really clarify what the intent of the metal, colored metal means in that. So it's up to the commission to have that, and I think they'll want to discuss that with you.
Yeah. And you can discuss the materiality of this building, but it also should be noted that there is a building pad marked on the site that has not been completed to full detail with no submitted elevations. So it is a condition in this report that any of the materials and the architectural design that you guys decide on tonight will have to be the same for that building that's marked here but not completely in detail. And this site does require a conditional use permit. So just to discuss the harmoniousness of the existing uses in the vicinity, I think this is a really good spot for ATV sales and repair and warehouse, especially considering the other commercial sites where this would be allowed are a little bit closer to residential sites. And so I think that this use is actually perfect here because you get to be away from the neighborhoods. It's a little bit more of an intensive use and could have some noise issues, obviously. But here they get the highway access and the highway visibility, and as well as they're kind of removed from a lot of other spaces that could be more sensitive to this use. So I think it's a great place, and especially with the surrounding developments that are coming up, I think it's going to add some synergy to the place, to this west side. In terms of access and transportation issues, like I said, it is a little bit underparked, but they do have loading and loading facilities on site, and that should be kept in mind because we don't want any issues with like ATVs being loaded in the street. We do suspect that as this west side continues to develop that there will be more traffic issues, and so keeping those ATVs and all the large trucks associated with them off the street and keeping them on site for display and for test driving and for loading and unloading is really important to keep those vehicles on site in this case. There is no sidewalk provided, and obviously this is not a pedestrian friendly use and not necessarily even a pedestrian friendly neighborhood, but it should be noted that just north in Parish Creek they put in a lot of effort to put in those really nice sidewalks and the boardwalks and connected them to the other bike paths in the area. And so ideally, it would be connected to this greater West Side neighborhood, but there are no sidewalks in place, and that's because there really is no requirement in industrial zone to have a sidewalk on the street. So it's just something to keep in mind that this site might not necessarily use it as much, but just to the north, there's going to be, hopefully pedestrians walking around. So we would ideally like that all connected. Obviously, noise and traffic could be a slight issue here. They are required to follow the noise ordinances that we have in the city. And like I said, keep the vehicles off the street as much as possible unless they are allowed to be on the street, because I know that some of their vehicles probably will be allowed. If there's any washing or detailing of the vehicles that will be done on site, it should be addressed in their construction plans as well. And those were the main issues that we found in terms of the vehicle repair and storage and display. Obviously, all the display should be done on site as well. I know a lot of it's going to be done in the building with their new design, but there will be some along the highway and in the corners and the landscaping as well. So.
Thank you, Cassie. I did have one question. You didn't dwell on this in your presentation, but the lighting, I was a little bit confused by the language in the staff report. Lights are lined. I think, I guess that means lights line the eastern and southern half of the property facing the highway.
Yeah, so they're.
But no lights on 950 West.
Yeah, so there are lights around, let me see if I'm looking at this right. Yeah. So towards the highway, and then on the southern end of the lot, and so towards the freeway, and on the south where there's no development to the south, but there's no lights shown on my plan to the street, to the public street, where people will be accessing the building.
Okay.
So the lights seem to be more for display and lighting of the building and the vehicles that will be on display facing the highway, but not necessarily for the drivers.
Other questions for staff?
Just so you know, we do have intersection lighting requirements that the Public Works Director would require if there's missing street lights.
And that would be on
Not
950?
red, green, and yellow, just safety lighting.
Yeah. That would be on 950?
Yes, because you have a T intersection there, so there should be verification that there is a street lamp installed for that intersection.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Let's turn some time over to the applicant. If you're here, we'd invite you to come forward at this time. I think we've got some questions for you.
Do you want both of us?
Well, probably one at a time, but if you'd like to both come up, and we'll ask you each our questions, I guess. Please state your name for the record.
My name's Curtis Bingham. I'm architect with CRSA, architect in licensing. So, almost
Welcome.
there.
Any comments on the staff report of the presentation tonight?
No, I do have some stuff on the exterior materials. I brought some samples I wanted to show you, see if there was some comment on that.
Great. I think that would be one of our questions, so
Okay.
go ahead and explain what your
We do have on the, if you're looking at the exterior elevations, there's the Honda dealer side and there's a band. The trouble that I'm having as a designer is I have 3 different parties I'm trying to appease: the owner, 2 dealers, and the city. And, somewhere in between is what we're trying to figure out here. So the dealer is requiring this metal panel as part of their branding and their vision. And so we do have 1 strip above Honda on that east elevation, and it's about a 4-foot band that goes around the east elevation there, and that's built where the only metal panel will be.
And so what is that metal?
It's an aluminum composite metal panel. So it's 4 millimeters thick. It's got aluminum on both sides and then a composite material in the middle. So it's really nice stuff. It's clean, and I don't think that falls under the metal siding.
It's not corrugated.
Right.
And so this is just above the sign, you say, so this isn't...
Right, so there, yeah, there's, if you're looking at that.
Below the sign is primarily what?
Yep. I did run into one issue with when we're looking at doing all stone tile on those elevations, that the manufacturer didn't do a Honda red. So we will have to do one little section of red metal panel, and I've updated that on these elevations. If you want me to pass this around too, because that's not showing that latest change.
Is this something you've seen, Corey, or is this new?
It would be new to me. I know they were looking at the dealership requirements, and so we haven't seen them either.
And would this go from top to bottom?
Yeah, it'd just be between those two windows on both sides of the entrance of Honda. There's just it'd be like a column that's 2 feet wide of red metal panel.
Again, this is colorized metal.
It's just, see those windows to the left of that? Keep going, right there. Go from bottom to top.
Right here.
Cover that area right to all the way to the parapet, top of the parapet, just like that. Yep. I have that updated in here if you want a copy.
What type of metal is that?
It's the same stuff, but
type?
it would be red.
Just red.
Yep. And the band that's shown there is silver like that.
Good. Any other comments you'd like to make on staff
And
report changes?
Here's samples of the stone. That would be on both the Can-Am side and the Honda side at the entrances. It's a ceramic tile that's meant to mimic stone or concrete.
Well, this is being passed around. I had one other question. What are your typical hours of operation?
8 to 5.
So you don't have any evening opening even for the dealership?
Oh, sorry. Yes. I think I'm going to leave that to Sean to answer, but.
Sure.
My name's Sean Hutchings. I'm with Moto United, and our typical hours are 6 o'clock is when we close in the evening, Monday through Saturday, and there are evenings that we're there later until the last deals are loaded up, but
Sure.
generally done by 7.
So the reason I asked that question is I am concerned about no lighting on the 950 West Road, especially if your dealership is open. Wintertime, it's dark by 5 o'clock. I am concerned about safety of people coming into your facility at that time.
I believe on the back side of the building, we don't have any access planned there for the public. Everybody.
Everything's going to be on the south or
yeah, correct.
the freeway side?
Correct.
Okay.
There are wall pack lights on that west side, back side of that building.
So some safety lighting back there, but none of the larger lighting.
Right.
Bigger
Once
lighting.
again, no entrances. Everything on the west side is the back side of the mechanical shop.
Could
and
we see the
storage area.
driveways again? Just take a look at that. That isn't exactly how I envisioned it.
So you're looking east to the top, and then 950 is right here, and then the two entrances.
Okay, and so you've got lighting along the north, south, and west?
Yes.
Is that correct? Well, let's see, north, south, and I guess it'd be west. But nothing other than just pack lights along the east?
Correct.
The lighting that the engineer had spec'd is for the light poles is the same light that's on the wall. It just doesn't have a pole. LEDs. the very end is the electrical.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. Other questions for the applicant?
I'd like to know your response to Cassie's comment regarding sidewalks for purposes of connecting this property to the property just north of it that will have a number of sidewalks built into that design.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you have to see where those walks connect, and it could be I think the trick is our detention ponds. We need those. Don't know where we'd fit a sidewalk in right there. But
Yeah, what we'd need to do is go with the engineers, see what the street cross-section width and how much is built and if there's space
So
in that cross-section.
where are the sidewalks now, Corey, in relationship to this property? Where's the closest one?
The closest sidewalk is the bridge overpass on 1250 West. That's the current closest sidewalk. What you have is just directly north where the road terminates. It crosses a large drainage facility, and you will have sidewalk in that Parish Creek Business Park circulating inside of the business park. And then there's a trail connection on the south side of their property out to 1250 West. So there, if you put sidewalk here, at least any type of frontage, even partial, there's a gap that's going to occur across that detention, I believe.
So sidewalk to nowhere.
Yeah. So we'd have to plan for that gap across that detention area. Not detention, storm drainage area.
And we currently don't require sidewalks in that industrial zone.
No, not in a street cross-section for subdivision development. We don't require sidewalk. So that's the question is in the right of way, do we have sufficient place to put a sidewalk, or has the street been widened to use up all of that right of way? And I, at this time, wouldn't be able to answer that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but that would fall under probably a condition, right, of the conditional use permit. It's not required, so.
Right.
Again, just I guess to remind me and the commission, there'd have to be some public need for that, and I guess I'm not seeing it. Other questions for the applicant? Thank you very much. This matter's been scheduled for a public hearing. I'd like to invite anyone who would like to come forward at this time to speak on this issue to do so at this time. Seeing no one coming forward, I'll close the public hearing, turn the matter over to the commission for further questions, comments, or debate.
So if you, just to answer your question, if you look at the site, this is the Bluebird bus facility. This will be the Moto United site. This is Premier software. You do see you have the private sidewalks of Premier software installed. I did remember that, but it leads to nothing but the street. And if you, this site ends shy of this drainage area, and the next sidewalk will exist internally to this Parish Creek development. And then the pathway runs down the detention to this. We'll have to cross the creek and come out right here in the road. So if we cross that creek, they will terminate the sidewalk path right to that location, and then we'll have to pick up the sidewalk. The goal really for that pathway is to be able to do a cross. We worked with UDOT to get permission to terminate it there, but it'll be to come back and go to that west side and go to the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the only public sidewalk in the industrial park.
Thank you, Corey. Other questions, comments? Chair will entertain a motion on the final site plan.
I'll make a motion to approve the final site plan for the Moto United Power Sports dealership on 940 North and 960 North, 950 West with directives 1 through 12. Reasons for actions A through C as noted in staff's report.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further debate? Not, we'll go ahead and vote. Commissioner Hammond?
Aye.
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 Moving on to the conditional use permit. Meant to say this. We had reasons 1 through 11, or 1 through 12 in that previous motion, just by way of clarification, unless I didn't receive the latest one. Condition number 11 says, all signs on site shall be completed in accordance with blank. I assume that's CZC 1254. Right? So we'll make that change. Everyone
Yes.
okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. So moving on to the conditional use permit, any further questions or comments on that? If not, Chair will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion for the Planning Commission to approve the conditional use permit for Moto United Power Sports dealership on 940 and 960 North, 950 West, with conditions 1 through 10, and reasons for action A and B in the staff report.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further debate? Hearing none, take a roll call vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
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 Motion passes. Motions pass. Thank you for being here. Look forward to having you in town. It'll be a
Just
nice
for
facility.
clarification, I'm assuming in the motion that you're including the material that was submitted to you as
Yes.
part of the architecture.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I think, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Get those back.
Yeah, no, I was gonna put them in my house.
Okay, item number 3 on our agenda is, has also been scheduled for a public hearing. This is consideration of a proposed amendment to the general plan, Chapter 12-480-2, Neighborhood 1, Southeast Centerville, to consider future development scenarios that will include potential for residential uses for the Pages Lane commercial area. Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the commission, here we are. It's a long-awaited day. Doesn't mean we're finished, just a long-awaited day to get to this point. We've prepared the alternatives. I'll just describe them when we get to that point. But just to recap, we were asked by the council to look at the southeast neighborhood plan. We've segmented that. We accomplished the residential at the beginning of this year and those edits. We've moved on to the Pages Lane commercial area. Get that right so it's not confused with Parish like the last meeting. Pages Lane commercial area. And just for your information, there's also a section in this plan about Main Street. So we're on that topic as we go along. But recapping what you've done in general, back in May, we hosted the public forum. We reported to you on May 24th, a summary of that forum. June 14th, we had a work session talking with the commission members about the Pages Lane commercial area. July 12th, we provided you some feedback that you requested on values of the land, the park impact fees, some early ideas of scenarios associated with that to try to grasp your thinking around some of the public comment on park space and cemetery space. As part of that discussion, you wanted to honor that public forum discussion. We also hosted a specific meeting with the business and property owners. And by the way, the business and property owners were also invited to the public forum specifically, as well as the general notice of that public forum. You held a discussion with them August 23rd. We reviewed narrowing some of the early ideas, and hopefully today we've captured the base framework of those ideas. We've split them in the staff report. Alternative A is looking at the redevelopment of Page's lane area, one element that's common is that we've created two sides, a western side and an eastern side of that whole large block. In general, the western side is maintaining some commercial. The eastern side is where the scenarios of the general plan change. Although we did create new language, if you see what we've provided, the font color in black is the original language, and all the strikeouts and the new coloration and underlines is the addition. So we added new language for both areas, but the significant change would be the scenarios on the eastern half. Just briefly, you're looking at residential redevelopment on the eastern half. I think the densities are still to debate. The plan is recommending, a residential medium, which right now at this point is up to 8 units an acre. I know that there are a few differing opinions on what residential medium should consist of, so I think that's something to be mindful of. And then the idea of scenario A or alternative scenario A is that there's a second goal that says before you move forward with looking at the eastern side for actual rezone and moving it for redevelopment to residential, whatever that lands to be, that the city first initiate a study about a park. And so that scenario is specific about a park, and I believe we called out 2 to 3 acres in size, roughly. I think in the staff we heard mention that a half-acre park is probably not the best thing for a city park. So the 3 acres, if you recall, was the average neighborhood park size, but that average is skewed by a large neighborhood park. So we put in there 2 to 3 acres, and you're certainly welcome to have a discussion and receive some feedback from the public on that scenario of a park. If you go to the alternative B, maintains that western half language. It moves to a very similar language on the eastern half to residential development. But what changes is the goal 2. The goal 2, rather than a city park, is the feasibility of some type of public-private partnership. As residential development takes place, it would be expected to be in the middle block area to buffer the commercial and the new residential, and that there may be opportunities for the city to creatively participate in getting public access to a portion of residential open space and design some type of feature for that area. So those are the 2 scenarios we perceived at our level that was narrowed down to. Remember, we've talked about the mixed use and the commercial. If I recall correctly from your last meeting, in the scenarios, it was discussed that the commercial, regardless, is going to stay even if it's in a non-conforming status, so it allows the existing commercial to continue on. You receive feedback like the Scout store, the Dick's Ace. They simply, if this were passed as a general plan, they wouldn't even be necessarily non-conforming unless we went for a rezone. So it would stay commercial. They would use it as commercial. It provides an opportunity that the general plan says, hey, you might transition to residential when it's appropriate, and then have the discussion about city park or a feature or whatever the case may be. So it does not call out mixed commercial uses. It just says future redevelopment is changing to residential. So I think that's the discussion. Should we go to the residential conversion? What is residential medium for this? Note that your next item is talking about variations of residential medium, so I don't know how it all plays out. And then also the issue of park versus a feature and what size it should be.
Well, I tend to agree. I'm not sure it makes a lot of sense to discuss one without the other. They're separate agenda items, and obviously should be treated separately from that standpoint, but I do believe it's all sort of on the table, and we have to make it part of our general discussion. Anything else, Corey? I didn't mean to interrupt.
Nope, that's it. I think hopefully we've given you the framework to start engaging the official public input and begin the formulation of a recommendation.
Thank you, and thank you, staff, all of you, I'm sure, have spent a lot of time on this, and we do appreciate your coming back with these two scenarios as we requested last time. So since the applicant is the city, let's just take a moment, if you wish, to ask questions of Corey or Cassie or Lisa on this, and then we'll open the public hearing.
Corey, as we discuss the densities, because this is an amendment to the general plan and it isn't necessarily a zoning tool, I can see how it would be useful to use terms like residential medium, but seeing as they're just objectives and guidelines, I don't see a reason why we can't just put numbers there, and wherever the RM debate lands or however that gets changed, if we give guidelines and objectives with general numbers, then that can act as the general plan should, from my understanding, to simply guide the ordinances that we put in place through the zoning code.
Yeah, I think you can approach it from that venue, and again, I'm also understanding that we might be parsing out some different residential medium standards. You could just say residential medium and then let the cards fall what they may be as somebody comes in and rezones. But as you do that, that leaves all of the categories of residential medium open for debate during a rezone process. If it's the desire of the commission to say, no, this specific area should have limitations, then that maybe is the better way, is to call out the number, and then the zoning ordinance either is able to reflect that or has to be changed to reflect that opportunity.
Yeah, especially considering the intent might be very confusing in the future. If RM changes the month after,
yeah,
it might be, in my opinion, more beneficial if we want to include numbers in these objectives rather than RM.
Any suggested numbers?
15.
I would like to just weigh in on that. In general, the general plan is just a guidance, and most cities have moved away from making the general plan mandatory, and state law even references this fact that the general plan is merely advisory. Centerville has sort of kept the old school way, which is making some of the general plan mandatory through saying, on our rezones, we're going to look to what the general plan says. So by that connection, we've said, okay, well now it's mandatory, but we're still using general advisory guidelines. So I do think the way this was set up, at least my understanding is, we're going to put the numbers in the more specific zoning code. And I did have this conversation with Corey about, okay, how are we going to make the decision about RM4, RM6, RM8? Because I am concerned from a legal standpoint how you're objectively going to make a distinction between those three. But I think he did a very good job in our next agenda item, which is saying, here's how we're making those distinctions based upon where it is, what kind of facilities, et cetera. So I think given the direction we're going with our RM 4, 6, and 8, that I wouldn't necessarily suggest specific numbers in your general plan unless you want to go back in and make sure that we've done an analysis for every single piece that you're talking about. Now, I know this is a smaller area, but I think you need a more specific, if you're going to call out a number in your general plan, because generally we're saying, no, we want to make that determination at the rezone level. And why not? Because as well, I know you're saying, look, things can change, but that's the other reason we do zoning, you know, and we make that determination, because we're going to make that determination at the time that the application comes in and look at how things have developed and look to our general plan. So I think there's some merit to just saying, look, we want medium low and high, and then again, if we ever do change our zoning code, we'll want to revisit where we've said medium and high, but we don't have to amend it if it's not necessary.
Right now, in our code, if we were to adopt RM, implicitly or implied is a number, 6 to 8, right? Or 4 to 8. What's our RM zone currently?
You mean if you were to say
Right
we
now.
want low-density residential?
Right.
If you use that language in your general plan, yes, you're saying, because our low-density residential only goes up to 4.
Right.
And if you're using the term medium in your general plan, you are saying anywhere up to 8.
Right, but I guess the question, and at least my question would be, if we just use the term medium density in the general plan, and then adopt a graduated program for what medium density means, do we need to in some way identify that in the
You
general
are
plan?
delaying that decision to the rezone level. So I think it's a good debate, and so as Corey said, you could do it either way. But if you're going to put a specific number at the general plan level, I mean, I don't think you need to do it for the entire city, but you'd want to analyze what areas, because by default, then you're already making the rezone decision. There's nothing to analyze at the rezone level. So you want to be very careful. And
Yeah, so an example would be is just say you just do a 4, called out a number 4, and then you adopt, I think what Lisa makes a good point, then you adopt something that has this gradation, and the situation meets the gradation factors, but the general plan just capped it. So you have to decide which tool I mean, if it was in an ideal situation, the acceptance would be is that this area is slated for medium, and then we use the variations of medium if they're adopted to make that final decision at a later date. But I'm also recognizing that it's a hot topic for this neighborhood, and if you feel an overwhelming need that you just want to not abandon, but you want to set aside for this specific area any of those gradation provisions that might be adopted, you're accepting, you can call out a number, but
Well, it might be much ado about nothing, because it looks like you've done both in the staff report on further investigation. You call it medium density and up to 8 units per acre. So that kind of covers both the bases.
yeah.
Sorry, Commissioner.
No, I think that's a good point. And I guess to that point, not to beat this any further than we need to, but if we just simply say medium density, and then there's a zone text amendment that has this graduating or granulating or whatever we want to call it, density, I assume that medium density language in the general plan would encompass all of those gradations.
Right, and I think you make a great point. If medium is the choice, I'm not sure you have to call out the second term up to, because up to is still inferred
Still allows
something
some
up to. So,
flexibility.
just say, I think it's simplistic as medium, and then let the zoning provisions make that decision on what type of medium.
yeah, and actually I hadn't noticed that, because most of the time we just say medium. So for instance, on page 2, we're just saying this area should be medium to high high commercial intensities. Okay.
Right.
But then you're right, on the top of page 3, scenario A, it says medium density up to 8 units per acre.
And staff is hedging a little bit. The reason we've put that language in there is because we do think 8 units an acre in a public-private feature is something that's valuable. But if we choose the other merits of gradation, then that decision's made later.
Yeah, and I would, sorry, I'm just reading this. Then your general plan is saying we want up to 8 units per acre. So someone could argue,
Yes,
hey, the general plan says 8. Now
Yeah,
you don't have the discretion to go to 6.
Yeah,
right.
that's-
And
that's
that's
my
the good
concern.
point I think in making. But the reason that it shows up to begin with, because I know there's been debate, should we just do 4?
Yeah.
And as we drafted this was being drafted, and the RM stuff is coming on the heels of all of this, and staff is drafting 8 simply because if we're going to try to partner, and I don't think it's enough partnering at 8 units an acre to get a park. We're just going to either participate in getting a park or not. But a public-private feature, I think, can be driven by what the final density comes out to be. So this is a little bit of a chicken and egg question right now. If the gradation passes, and I know it's a big if right now, because we haven't even debated it, but if it passes, I think the cleaner way is just call residential medium and let the zoning ordinance implement it.
Well, maybe that's what we need to say.
Yeah.
Is we could call it medium density. We strike up to 8 units per acre, but we say medium density as determined.
Yeah.
As determined by the code, by I don't know, as.
I just say
as
medium
determined.
density for future and then let the
Yeah,
rezone
it's understood.
time it.
Yeah. Just strike the 8 units.
Yes.
That way we don't.
I think
create
that's
an
the cleaner
expectation.
way of doing it.
I would feel more comfortable with that, striking the parenthetical.
It just seems, I mean, I'm gonna do it. This just seems puzzling to me, meaning we're saying, we're gonna adopt right now, we're gonna recommend to the city council medium density, which is a term that is not defined. I mean, what's the use of recommending a term in flux? What guidance? I mean, I guess we conceptually know it's gonna be generally in this target based on Corey's staff recommendation, but what's medium here sure ain't medium in Salt Lake, or what's medium here, you know? So I thought, anyway.
Well, I think you make a good point. If we didn't have the residential section of the general plan that says low density is basically up to 4, medium is to 8, high is to 12. And so when you say medium here, if you didn't have that in another section of the general plan, I would agree. What is medium? But our general plan in the residential section already defines medium.
Yeah.
So good point. It's just reading the language at its face value.
Okay. So that appears in both scenarios, right? I think it does. Yeah, we've got top objective number 2 in alternative A at the top of that page, and then also in B at the bottom of, we don't have page numbers on this, but it's objective number 2 under goal number 1 in alternative B. I think those are the only 2 places it appears.
Yeah, I just search medium, it only comes up twice.
Okay. Other questions for staff or comments? If not, I'd like to open this up for the public hearing. Anyone wishing to comment on this, please come forward at this time and state your name for the record.
Hello there. Thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. My name is Buck Swaney. I'd like to give just a quick introduction of myself and why I'm here. I have spent the last 20 years as a planning consultant, have run one of the big consultancies in the Salt Lake area for many years, and have been helping communities do their general plans for a very long time, including personally writing the action plans for economic development. And so the transformation economics is something that I'm very, very familiar with. I'm here tonight because of some of these questions tonight and how they bear on the economics of redevelopment on this site. And I am here representing DICA Properties, the east side tenants that we've talked about so much tonight. And so what I wanted to do is actually cover a few important, what I consider concept points. And also with that, hopefully be able to have a little bit of a conversation or a clarification about the intent or the objective in terms of timing. Is this something that you want to see transform slowly over a very long time, or is this something that you're actually trying to engender transformation quickly? Because that question about that objective should dictate exactly how the decision is made. And so with that, I'm going to just cover a few points, and I hope that this is helpful and not taken any way other than that. The first point, and I think it's going to connect to what Logan was talking about, is that you're talking about a site where the property owners have decades of their lives and millions of dollars invested and a lot at stake. And so as Logan's discussion went, I was nodding my head a little bit because it's pretty important that the decisions for change here are crystal clear to the landowners, that they're not somewhere in an accordion between 4 and 8 units per acre. And the reason is the economics of redevelopment are very, very difficult. The difference between 6 units per acre and 8 units per acre will be the difference between seeing a transformation or not. Right? It's really that simple. And so somewhere in the space of 8 to 10 units per acre, the economics of redeveloping this property work. And somewhere lower than that, they don't. And so that's an important target place for looking at a near-term transformation. If you could put something like that in place, chances are very good that in 1 year, you would have a transformation on the site. If you put something much lower than that in place, what's going to happen is the existing economics are going to continue to play out. And I mean, it's no secret. You see how that's gone for the last 8 years or so since Dix was moved from this corridor over to the Parish Lane corridor. Is it Parish Lane where it was moved? Well, yeah, right? So that's the first point. The second point is along part of the conversation that Corey was covering, which is that there are public-private partnership opportunities. And the way that as a planner or an implementer that I would try to make this work is I would look at a situation where we have increasing opportunities are going to be assumed with increasing density. One of the things you could do is look at a situation where you provide a clear-cut density bonus for the dedication of park space. So for example, if you have your baseline set at 8 units per acre and the developer comes in and says, we'll give 2 acres of this to park, you would be able to create a bonus of 50% density for each of the acres that are contributed to park. And then the developer is able to cluster those units on one portion of the property and also serve the public interest of creating a decent park there with really no economic resources or fiscal resources required on the city's part. So it can be a true win-win. That kind of a partnership is something that could be managed here in this context. A couple of other details, and that's that, you know that out here currently, with the way things are set up, we have a recipe for blight. When Rogers Memorial and Dix were moved out to the other corridor, it evacuated all of the energy from this place. No more real reason for people to do very much commerce here. And it made low-quality commercial use really the rule. It was the only place that anybody could market to. And so with the exception of ACE on the DECA side, everything else there, all of our opportunities have been low level, and there's been a lot of no's, just things that we don't want to do. However, a lot of these property owners are starting to bleed just a little bit, and it's getting increasingly difficult to say no. So we have ACE. It has a 17-year fuse left on that lease, 17 years before we're moving to a transformation on that property. If we don't do something to engender change, what's going to happen is the other properties there are slowly going to be added to the lease inventory, and that 17-year fuse will turn to a 20 or a 30 or a 40-year fuse because the landowners have to make economic use of that land, right? So anything that you can do to engender that change quickly in the near term is going to lead you to the opportunity to transform the place. Anything that is oriented to control those uses and not allow the transformation is naturally going to lead to an increased term for the blight situation. It could go on for a very, very long time. Couple more points, and thank you, because I know I'm taking a lot of time, but there's a lot of technical stuff to say, and it's important. By the way, I'm on the Murray Planning Commission. I chair it, and so I know what your job is like, and I know I'm talking too long, and thank you for just allowing me. I appreciate it. One more thing that I think I would cover is that the opportunity on this site to look at it as a public acquisition for a park is realistic. If Centerville City had the resources to pay market value for the land, it has been recently under contract in the neighborhood of $12 a square foot, $550,000 per acre. So if this community wanted to best serve its citizens' interests, it would probably be realistic to these people to hear a real offer for coming, purchasing, and beginning that transformation. Of course, the biggest upside to that is it puts the city completely in the driver's seat for how transformation takes place and when. There's some leases to wait out at that point, and that's really the downside. The other thing beyond residential density that supports change is probably the best commercial use that's left as a realistic viable alternative is one that your table of uses prohibits across the board, and that's indoor storage. Doing a very high quality indoor storage unit would create the kind of resources that allow the landowner here to begin to reinvest in the property and its upkeep. And there's a number of examples that can be shown of where those sorts of redevelopments have been done very, very well, and where they actually add a lot to the visual quality of a site that's otherwise under the threat of blight. So there's a lot of opportunity here. I think that my most important key message that I'd like to translate or transfer is that these property owners are interested in transformation. They're fully supportive of opportunities that are realistic and economic to change what's going on here. And they don't want to sit for 8 or 10 more years suffering through leasing to jujitsu shops and hair and nail salons and things like that. They're motivated to make some positive change for the community here and to beautify it. So the message is, if we can create the right kind of tools, and the framework isn't denying some possibility for the right mix of tools, and if we can kind of respect the position that those landowners and property owners are coming from and that they're stuck in, you give them the tools, they're going to be motivated to make the change, and it'll be good for Centerville City and its citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Buck. Appreciate you coming. Questions for?
I'll stay here if you have questions.
For him? Okay, thank you.
No.
Anyone else like to come forward and speak at this time? If not, close the public hearing.
Mr. Chair, just for a fun trivia thing, I think we came up in our valuations, was it 575? 575,000 an acre?
We were pretty close. Interesting. Some interesting information there. And just to reiterate one point that kind of caught my attention, and maybe something that we could discuss a little bit tonight as we consider what we send up to the planning area, to the city council. And that is, if we are looking at, and I guess this would be alternative B, a public-private partnership in developing a park of sufficient size to be meaningful, it may make sense for us to think about the possibility of a density bonus. It would probably get us sufficient park area to make it meaningful. What I'm concerned about is having too small of a park to become something that we need. And I guess really that could play out in either alternative A or B, because I think we're dealing with the same concept in each. Struck me as something we might want to talk about and discuss. Any thoughts on that?
Do you think that item would be appropriate to discuss in a general plan amendment? Or perhaps at a level of crafting zoning code might be more appropriate for that item?
Well, we have consider allowing up to medium density. If we just leave it at that in the general plan, I don't think it gives us a whole lot of leeway. I'm wondering if we can, in a general fashion, indicate that higher densities may be available based on
Yeah, just so you're aware, there is a density bonus system in zoning tools. The difficulty with that system is how it apply in the situation. But our zoning code takes any residential density, and you'd have to have, I think if it's non-single family, it's a minimum of 5 acres. And I think we're just over 8 acres total. So what I'm trying to point out is if a density bonus, regardless of general plan and others, the zoning code has a plan development overlay option where you can get up to a 20% density bonus if it goes above and beyond what's expected of the provisions of the zoning ordinance. It starts at 5 acres. You have to show you're doing something more than what the traditional RM zone would do, and it is a legislative process with a cap at 20% bonus. That's in place right now. So in theory, they could try to use the 20% and see if they could get it. Now, the issue of incentivizing, you know, that's more of they're trying to make the argument to get to that point versus the city's interested in redevelopment and trying to encourage that point. So it's a reversal view of a bonus.
Yeah, yeah. Understood. Other questions, comments?
I hadn't considered the density bonus, but I will say in reviewing both options, I was struck by just how small the parks are that we're considering in either option. Logan had made the comment during our last meeting that if we're going to do a park, and I think I'm remembering this correctly, Logan, so I'm not trying to say anything that you didn't say, but to the effect of, Matt, I'd like to just see, you know, 6 acres or a big park over there. And I found myself thinking, yeah, I mean, I want, my own personal view is I'd like to really see as big of a park as we can get over on that side, because I'm looking at alternative A and it says, the way the language that's drafted, to establish a neighborhood park, possibly 2 to 3 acres in size. And I would like to see language in this plan encouraging as large as a park that the city will support. And if that's in excess of 2 and 3 acres, all to the better in my mind, assuming obviously that there is support for such a park.
Right, and I think that's a valued viewpoint if you're looking at park options. I really do. And staff selected just the neighborhood provisions to it, and that's where we landed. So I think it's open for debate, for changing. The only thing I would comment if I were critiquing as large as possible is not the issue of the desire of as large as possible. I think the critique would be is the conversion of residential and what's left. And is that adequate space for what you expect the design? That would be the only critique of a language like that.
At the end of the day, I would hate to see a park, you know, we push so hard to get a park in and then have it be a less than meaningful park that just goes wah, wah, right? I mean, nobody wants a non-meaningful park there. The other thought that had occurred to me in connection with the park, and I'm looking now at alternative A, objective 1, is that the city, with the assistance of the Parks and Rec Committee, would reevaluate whether the southeast neighborhood has sufficient park space to serve local residents. And I think that one thing that we should consider having the Parks and Rec Committee look at is not just sufficient park space, but sufficient park types. In connection with this discussion, and you mentioned it in connection with the public-private partnership, you know, the idea of doing a splash pad or a dog park. I will admit I missed the tour of the historic homes because it's the one day of the year that South Davis Rec Center opens up their pool for dogs. So I got to take my dogs to go play in the pool, and I think that they thought that it was doggy Disneyland, because it's the one and only time that they have to go play with other dogs in this area. There simply are not dog parks at all in this area, and for somebody who's a dog owner with 2 large dogs, it's really nice to have a place to go to take your dogs. Exercise dogs are happy dogs and healthy dogs. So I think that we shouldn't just focus on the park space, right? The green trees and grass. I would encourage the Parks and Recreation Committee to look at also the types of parks, and whether that's a dog park or a skate park or a splash pad park or, you know, something else. But we do have sort of standard parks here in this area, so I'd like to see us be a little bit more forward thinking in terms of the types of parks that we're looking at.
Thank you. Your comments?
I like what Shaylin's saying about, you know, having a specific park that maybe addresses some specific needs that we don't currently have. I'm still leaning towards the public-private feature option just because I think it's more likely to happen. I don't want to give up on the dream of a nice big park, but I just think realistically, we're still, you know, I think there's a chance, and maybe with a density bonus, we can see a little bit bigger park, but it can be something that could happen, and so that's my opinion on that.
I will go on record as saying I would support a park. I would pay for a park. I would pay not an insignificant amount for a park. But I am obviously very pro-park. So, and that's just me. I still am very much in favor of if we can do it tonight, send up both options to the city council. I mean, they're the ones who ultimately will make this determination, and I think that it's important to give them both options, and then they can debate. I mean, I don't know, maybe they've looked at the finances and can say definitively a park is just simply not feasible, in which case they can write off that park option, but.
And I'm with you on, I agree, I'm willing to help pay for a park too. I just look at it and go, this is a redevelopment park, it's super expensive. It is not the last piece of property. I'm not saying we're not getting super limited, but, you know, can we do more with that? If we were gonna say, yes, this, you know, the city has the support to build the park and everybody's on board and the funding is there, would we want to spend it there, or would we want to put it somewhere else where maybe we can get a little more bang for our buck?
I think that is an excellent question for the city council.
I agree with you on that.
I guess I'm concerned about the timing of this. I think Buck made an excellent point. It's been made by the owners as well, that we've got a window of opportunity here that is not going to be here forever. And so you know, I don't know if we're punting here by sending both proposals up. I think both proposals have merit. But I do think because of the price tag associated with the park issue, that this is something that the city council really does need to weigh in on, and weigh in on fairly early in this process. Because if the city council basically says we can't afford a park, then we need to go to more of the alternative B approach and proceed in that manner. So I guess I'd make a recommendation that we send up both proposals with the idea that we would ask the council to specifically give us guidance on the fiscal aspect of this.
I like that idea.
Would you accept a friendly amendment?
Sure.
In terms of addressing on option A, objective 1, not just to look at sufficient park space, but also to look at sufficient diversity of park types?
Is this objective 1 under goal 2?
Yes.
And change that to?
Sufficient park space and diversity of park types to serve local residents.
And park types. Okay.
Goal 2, objective 1 of alternative A.
Any other proposed language changes? I think we also discussed possibly taking out the up to 8 units. You know, given what we heard from Buck tonight, any further thoughts on that?
Just because I love to keep Lisa uncomfortable. If it doesn't have a number, I don't know that I feel comfortable sending it up. But I just feel like it leaves this ambiguity that is a disservice to the citizens.
So you'd leave in the parenthetical?
Indeed, I would.
I'm okay with leaving it as median density and striking the up to 8. I think it gives us flexibility down the road, and I like having that flexibility.
Okay.
Can I make one more suggestion?
Sure.
And I'm looking again at alternative A, goal 2, and now I'm looking at objective 3. So my concern with trying to set an acre limit is that, I mean, we don't know what the property is going to look like. So I'm inclined to leave a little bit more wiggle room there by striking possibly 2 to 3 acres. Because if it's possible to get something larger, hey, that would be great in my mind, and simply say to establish a meaningful neighborhood park and leave that determination as to what constitutes a meaningful neighborhood park to whatever it is that's going to be going in there. And if I guess we wanted to be even more helpful to say, for example, and then put in, you know, brackets, e.g. at least 2 acres.
Yeah, maybe, meaningful is very vague.
It is.
So maybe if you say possibly 2 or more acres.
Yes,
or
a
something.
meaningful neighborhood park, and then I would probably put in at least 2 acres in size. Because I don't want to cap it on the top end at 3 if there is some way of getting 4 or 2.5 or 3.5 or 3 3/4.
Okay. Any other suggested language changes? I think it would be well for us to, for the record, vote on some of these. And so let's just go through the ones that I've jotted down, and if I've missed any, we can circle back. But on alternative A, goal 2, objective 1, adding park types as suggested by Commissioner Hayman. We have a motion to add that.
Also move.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion on that? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Moving to objective 3 on that same alternative A, goal 2, changing the language to read, to establish a meaningful neighborhood park, and then perhaps in parentheses, at least 2 acres in size, or does that work for you?
That works for me.
Have a motion?
Also move.
Second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any debate? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
The first one was, again, to make sure I'm getting them on my notes,
The first one was objective 1 under goal 2 of alternative
to
A.
add type.
And park
And
type.
diversity of
types.
park types.
Yeah.
I've got that,
Yeah.
all right. Thank you.
Is the second one okay?
Yes.
The last one that I have noted is the issue of whether we leave in the parenthetical in both alternatives A and B, dealing with up to 8 units per acre when we're talking about medium density. Someone like to make a motion on that?
I'll make a motion to strike the parenthetical up to 8 units and just leave it as allowing up to a medium density consisting of small lots, single-family uses, twin homes, etc.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Debate?
Yeah, I just want on the record, 2 reasons why I am not inclined to vote is I feel like we should include specificity so that our guidelines have more clarity when 10 is looked back. And second, I would like to see something higher than medium density.
Any rebuttal? Let's vote then. Let's take a roll call on this one. Commissioner Hayman?
Aye.
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 Nay.
Okay, any other proposed changes? Hearing none, I take it as the sense of the commission to, with these modifications, send both alternatives to the city council for their consideration. Both of them receiving, well, I wouldn't say a recommendation, but just sending them up with the specific request that we receive some guidance from the city council as to the reasonableness of continuing to consider a park from a fiscal standpoint. Do I have
Does
a
that
motion?
thought mean that they remand anything back to you, or
They-
they move forward with the
They could move
decision?
forward with it, with either one if they wish, but they could remand it if.
Okay, I just want to make sure that
if they're
it's
basi-
clear the expectation.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're basically saying we do not have the funds for a park.
And they can
Reconsider
decide
that
whether to
aspect of it.
modify or decide to send something back down for a consideration.
Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure the
Okay.
intent.
So that would,
So we're not going with one recommendation, just 2 options.
two
to look at.
recommendations with a request from the city council to give us guidance on
Well, is
feasibility
the
of the
thought
park.
to send it to city council and let them look at that and decide?
They can either move forward with one of the recommendations or remand it back to us for further consideration based on their fiscal decision.
Okay, but I thought our goal was kind of to send it to them for them to decide. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Do I hear a motion?
I so move. Exactly what you just said, Dave.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Let's take a roll call vote. Commissioner Hammond?
Aye.
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 Nay.
Just for the record, so those will include the reasons and findings in the staff report.
Yes. Thank you.
Nice work on those, staff.
Thanks, Cassie.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the discussion. And just for the record, understand your concerns, Logan. I think we may have an opportunity to revisit this in the future, and certainly on
Yeah, and I hope the commission doesn't think that I disagree with everything. In fact, that it was to send a message.
Thank you. Let's then move to the next item on the agenda.
Mr. Chair, just
yes.
real quick, can I thank the commission's patience with staff through all the process?
Again, thank you for your efforts. Let's move to item number 4. This is also scheduled for a public hearing. This would be to consider a zoning text amendment for residential medium zones. Staff.
So I don't know if this is a yay or we're going to create more discussion and items. I'm not sure where we're at here on this. Just by way of background, I think I can point to the general Hafoka property on Porter and the Brighton project that has generated a significant amount of discussion about particularly RMH zoning, designs, what's associated with it. Arising out of that was a goal to go back and look. The commission had that as a goal. During those goal settings, some other priorities seemed to rise a little bit above, and we did not get to the process of multifamily. What does it mean? What do we want to add as a result of some of the lessons learned? As a result of a rezone request to residential medium, this is the property west of the Hafoka project, the Brighton Home, the Walton Townhomes. That arrived to their level with a recommendation to approve. They rejected that rezone. The landowner and petitioners participated in going back to the city council on a following agenda to have a follow-up discussion of, you know, look, what do you want? What do you expect? The city council continued to, you know, maintain they didn't rescind back their decision on it. But they did have a discussion, as has been coined a little bit in the past, about granulation. I know Cassie, every time I use that word, says gradation, and reminds me. But the coined term out there is granulation of the council, of talking about additional tools, because there is this discussion of, if you recall the Bowling Engineering, he wanted to build 6, but he was just shy of the acreage. And he said, well, give me RH and I promise I'll build 6. And they said, well, you can promise all you want, but we make decisions based on what's there, not what you're going to tell us what you're going to do. And so there's this continued tension between a request, promises made that I won't go to this extent, and they feel hampered by those tools. And that's been expressed, you know, by everybody multiple times. I think this commission has expressed concerns, particularly with the Hafoka project. You know, do we need to relook at how we design residential street widths and so forth with it? So what was decided is, I think rezoning to residential high is long shot no matter where we're at this point in time. So reinventing residential high right now is not on the table. And the commission, or the council, directed staff to vigorously, I think was the coined term, to come back with residential medium and put more quills in the quiver, for lack of better terms, to give us some tools to work with. So we were assigned to bring that expeditiously to you and to move that up to their level. That doesn't mean that you can't debate. It's just a one meeting decision. It's just move this forward as quick as you can in the discussion. So we've done that. Now, Lisa and I have had some conversation, and I agree with Lisa's concerns. The council was flexible. Yeah, we want to know residential medium 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that's, you know, all of us at staff are like, well, this is going to be really interesting. How do we put, somebody can have 6, and you can have 7, you can have 4, you can have 2. And I don't think that I hopefully don't think that they were that aggressive expectation, because I obviously in the proposal didn't follow it. I don't have 8 different versions of the RM zone. The other concern is not just the idea of how you apply such a gradation. I think the issue is create a gradation, even if it's a minor gradation. What are the tools to apply it? How do we make that decision so that there isn't a randomness being applied based on very subjective moments in the decision-making process? And so we're making some attempt. But my introduction is at least this thought pattern. If we're going to introduce a gradation, and this is based on 4, 6, and 8, and we propose terms inside of those gradations, how mandatory are those terms? So I'll get to that discussion. But I think that's a very important policy question. If we have this gradation, we're going to apply a gradation, what is the specific mandatory? And the easy way to give you examples, Parish Lane. Is it may, should, shall? That's what we mean by mandatory. What are we trying to accomplish? So I think that's important. But back to the thematic elements. We have a proposal before you to create 3 categories, base elements from the ranges. I think everybody's been frustrated. We have a range. You can have 4 permitted and up to 8 conditional. When can you tell somebody they can only have 7? So we're trying to eliminate that. But we're replacing it. When can you tell somebody they can have 6? So it's a little bit rough. But we're creating those 3 categories, 4, 6, and 8, creating a definition, reaching into the RM zone itself and creating the purpose, the definition, how it's to be applied and looked at. We have to go to the use tables and make some changes to those use tables. And I've added some that I think you need to debate. Remember, single family is a conditional use in the RM zone. It's kind of odd that somebody has to condition a single family from a multifamily. It's usually the other way around, swapping it. I think the reason it was conditional is they were trying to save some of the RM for multifamily and didn't want somebody walking in with just single family. I think the thought patterns of recent have reversed that. We'd like to give you residential medium, but always do it as single family. So I think we have some of those tensions about that. So changing some of those uses, and I'll talk about that. And then this is where it wasn't necessarily talked about by the council directly, but in historic work sessions and goal setting, talking about design standards, architectural design, adjustments to landscaping, use of private rights of way. And I think the use of private rights of way has been the hot button in past development. So real quick, I point out to you, you're doing a text amendment, so you're looking at the general plan, so I won't go over all the general plan language, highlighted it. There's a lot of policies about housing, and a lot of it stems from a moderate income housing element. And the thing I'm trying to point out here is this is the common statement in the public. And it's not to insult them, because they believe their statement, but it stops at where they want it to stop. And there's so much more that trailers on about the discussion of density. So the If you go to the general plan section 12.422 residential development policies, this is where I referred earlier, we define what medium is, 5 to 8. Where is it? Residential development, policy 2. Residential development in Centerville is primarily low-density single-family. This is the character of development should continue as far as feasible and practical, and so the period gets ended. And so every public meeting, that's what gets quoted. We are only low density. We are only low density. We are only low density. And if that's true, we have a lot of policies to write off and get rid of, because there's a lot of follow-up to that. And it's in the same paragraph of 2. Medium or high density residential development that is allowed is in inappropriate locations within the city should provide these things. So this is where we go into the general plan and into the different neighborhoods. People are upset on where these appropriate locations have been applied. That's what the real problem is it's not good here, it's not good here, it's not good here. But yet their own neighborhood plan says here and here and here. So there's that inherent conflict. Maybe they're right, maybe that's still the right spot that we're going to choose. Those are debated. But it doesn't say in our general plan that the entire city is 4 units an acre, low single-family development only. And then I provide the other places. Moderate income housing was a heavy section. It's adopted far after the residential. It's the 2000 code from state. Every city has to have a moderate income housing element, and the state defines that you're to not use your policies to discriminate against that type of housing. You're to go in and try to find reasonable opportunities for multifamily development or single-family development, but reasonable opportunities for moderate income housing opportunities. It's difficult for Centerville, really difficult. When we're hearing a lot just off of Main Street selling for $600,000, I don't know if we can zone densities enough to get to moderate income housing. But that's not what the state code is asking us. It's asking us, don't use your police powers to purposely try to prevent it. And so that's something to keep in mind. So onward to the elements, and I'll try to be quick for you because I know you've read it, but I think it's part of the record. It's important. As we go to the code changes, we try to provide you a descriptive in blue on what's going on. But the first section, zones established, calling out 4, 6, and 8, and inserting that into the zones established. Here's an important section, the next one, zone purposes. This is the issue of shalls, mays, shoulds, wishes. The language here, there are 3 distinct categories, and it divides it out, and then we get to RM4 zone, which is section A. If you go to the last area, last sentence, the expected residential development style, this is where I want you to weigh in the feedback on the shalls and the mays and the shoulds. Do you want to, in our use definitions, we say, hey, this is a definition of a use, and typical uses are this. Typical uses are this. Doesn't mean it's always that, because the zoning administrator can add to it, the planning commission can interpret it, but typical uses. So I've changed for even Lisa's draft. I got away from typical, and I put in the term the expected residential development. That's still not really strong. Back to Logan, defining what you expect. The expected development, but that's still a little bit wishy-washy. The question is if you're using the 4, are we limiting the 4 to this expected style, but they could do something different? They get 4 units. This is what we kind of wish this 4 units would do, but if you can do it another way, okay, because you're at 4 units and we're comfortable with a 4-plex. I'm trying to, in my mind, say, are we ready to go that when we use the 4, when we use a low density at 4, we're saying we want single-family homes in that 4, we want twin home lots, and a twin home is a duplex, but it's split down in property lines, so you can sell each side of the duplex, so you can create a subdivision. Units are attached with a common wall, and each can be sold. Because a duplex in inappropriate location can also create problems in the neighborhood. So we do not allow twin homes right now at all. And that's sort of surprising, because if we want to encourage ownership at any reasonable allowance for moderate income housing, you're forcing them into the rental situation. Where if you could do a twin home at an affordable price and sell it on each lot and combine the construction, you can save some costs and some money. At 600,000, I don't know. We're going to get there, but so single family homes, turning it to a permitted use when you're in the 4 category. Twin homes, turning it to a permitted use, you're in the category. 0 lot line, we already allow that. That means that they can, if you go to Pioneer, the single family homes that originally started are on a 0 lot line and all of the yard space is on one side. That's a 0 lot line. We allow that, so I'm calling it out in the low. And the idea of this low is where does this get applied? So it's next to your single family areas. You're on a local or a minor collector somewhere infiltrating and close to a neighborhood. So think of what is Chad Morris's on 400 East?
Canyon Point?
Canyon Point. If you remember the feedback on his project, he's putting in triplexes and then keeping that one home, and you have all of that single family right there close next to it. And he's allowed 8 units an acre with that RM. Maybe that RM should be more of the 4 or the 6 than the 8. But it's tough because it's on 400. It's on 400 East, which is a major collector. But that's what we're saying about 4. I'm trying to get to the point that this is where we're really adjacent to single family. We're really doing infill. We're surrounded in a neighborhood, but it's a great buffer to City Hall in that neighborhood to use the 4. Because we do have all this residential medium around City Hall. And should that be 8 units an acre in the Dual Creek? I would venture to guess there would probably be some outcry if we converted to 8 units an acre around City Hall. But right now you could. So that's what 4. 6 is bumping it up, saying we're going to move to now more of the townhomes, the triplex, the fourplex. But you're still on a neighborhood street. We're not going to parking lots. We're not going to carports. We're not going to, you're still in an area. And this is HFOCA. It may have been not the best design in the world, but under the HFOCA scenario, they could have built and stacked units and put all parking lots and carports. And if we're really preserving Shayla Park, they're fighting the density, which is a valid fight. But if it would have been parking lots with carports, that project would be much more problematic from a neighborhood style. So the 6 is really being written around the idea that Brighton Homes, Walton Townhomes, when you infiltrate into that area on a collector and you're in this medium, but it's more of this neighborhood style, we don't want you doing it with parking lots and carports. We want you to use either public streets in a subdivision, or when you do a PUD, planned unit development, you use a private street, and then we address the private streets later. The RM8 zone, unfortunately, this is like the Bell property. You got a RM on one side, you got a commercial very high on the other side, but it is on Porter, which is not a major traffic street. So should that be a 6 or should that be an 8? I think these are the weighing factors that I'm trying to balance as we create these definitions. And then one more time to reiterate, how mandatory do you want this? Will the 6 always be on a private road or a public street? Or will you allow something else? So it's a thought. But in spite of that, we've got to go in and change the density tables. So the permitted use is always 4. Wherever you go, we keep maintain the permitted use is 4. The conditional use changes from the range 5 to 8 to 6 is 6 units an acre, 8 is 8 units an acre. So that change takes place. The table of uses. This was a difficult place because I'm trying to reintroduce single family, multifamily dwelling, twin home, and we have this problem. Right now, in this table, we're saying multifamily is permitted. Well, if you go to the use table, it's permitted. But if you go over to the residential density table, 5 to 8 is conditional. Which one's the rule of law? And so you use the code provision, the more restrictive applies. So, but right now in the table of uses, multifamily is just a P. It doesn't talk about 5 to 8, doesn't talk about. So in trying to rectify that, I'm creating this new category, which is every time you do something, you confuse the world for the next person coming on board. Permitted, conditional, allowed. Allowed is saying, hey, there's more to this than just saying you're permitted. Go over to these provisions to understand what's allowed. So the A with the footnote is saying we're not going to call out just a P or just a C. There's more to this applies, so you have to bump over now to the RM zone and read how the permitted use is going to apply. Don't know if it's smart, but that's the way I tried to resolve it. And then the last section is trying to address at minimum some design standards. So real quick, architectural design. We're saying when you come into multifamily, we expect an architect to be engaged with your project. I know that that's adds some costs to a developer, and they're frustrated. So when you have this moderate income housing, yet you're requiring them to invest in an architect, you have this tension. But it's really important to involve architects in a project that needs some design, some layout, because you really need not somebody to have a piece of property that's multifamily and try to design it themselves. It doesn't create a cohesion that an architect can get involved in, and we can talk with them at a staff level as they start preparing projects. So we're saying you will engage a professional architect in the project. Again, the tension is it adds costs. Now we're adding exterior design standards, fairly generic in the sense of not trying to create an identity. You know, it has to look with Farmington stone. That was the famous term used for so many years here. Farmington stone, Farmington stone. Where's Farmington stone? In Farmington. Well, we're Centerville. But we really like Farmington stone. So I'm not trying to go to that level, but I am trying to say, here's some basic things. You just can't build this stark rectangle-shaped building and put a pinstripe on it and say, awesome. And so I'm trying to get that articulation. You see it in the Parish Lane Design Guidelines. You see it in the Shorelands Commerce Park. I'm dumbing those down a little bit, but right now we just don't regulate architectural design at all. And so we're using the conditional use process. And here we can alleviate some of that tension in the CUP and just say, no, these are development standards. And then I do have to add in the RH because this is a section about the whole multifamily. So I do add in the commission to approve architectural design for RM and H. Landscaping and open space. We are heavy in our landscaping and open space on non-single family projects. We talk about that you have to have 40% of it open. Of that 40%, 50% of it has to be in common. The other 50% can be in the yard spaces. Where the tension is when somebody throws in a tot lot for their open space. Even I'm rolling my eyes when I see a tot lot. Here, I got my open space. Look at that slide. That's awesome, isn't it? And so I'm trying to say a little bit is that you've got to go back into this. You need to think about it as in your layout, active and passive spaces, private spaces, entry features, because right now we're just getting them because they're kind of being offered into the market. And they're kind of driving it and saying, is this enough? Is this enough? Is this enough to get my CUP? And then I kind of get bold and say, go beyond the tot lot playground or clubhouse when you design this. Think about open space. But here's the backlash to it. If you're a developer and you're getting aggressive in your open spaces, they're saying, then why am I paying so much in park impact fee per unit? Isn't that kind of what you're supposed to be doing with your park impact fee? So that's a tension. Yard spaces for families, kids, grandkids, grandpa trying to learn Frisbee golf, whatever, pickleball. There needs to be some of those in this project, what people would have as yards. But the more aggressive you get with it, the more tension is on developing the park impact fee. Private roadways. Just going into it really hard, the best I could. I think we should be flexible with allowing private lanes. A 50-foot wide swath of public street on a cul-de-sac for us to take care of is not cost effective. So we want people to use private streets where they can get some more of the space. But here's the downside. Every time you approve a private street, if it's not constructed well, what happens in 15 years? The HOA forgot to put that in a maintenance account. Can you guys take over the road and start plowing it? And so, you know, there's a tension there. So what we're saying is you'll build it to city specs as far as construction. So that there's a general term you're going to be accessing from a street. That's what we all do. But now if you go to a private lane or a parking lot, here's how you do it. Number 2 under D, I've kind of been talked out of the original number I put in there. I put in 10 dwellings because right now we only allow single family subdivisions on a cul-de-sac. The maximum you can have is a 400-foot length and 20 houses. And so 20 was hard for me originally because I'm thinking, wow, in single family we're allowing 20 homes. Multifamily, you know, we want to control how much multifamily has with just one single driveway into it. That could get messy for the fire. And again, it's back to the Chad Morris, forget
Canyon
the name.
Point.
Canyon Point. Cramming all 7 units.
7.
Small driveways, small lanes, hardly no parking. You know, I'm trying to get away from that and putting a bunch of units with just a driveway access. But I was talked back into 20 because when we met with the DRC, this is the planner, the engineer, the public works director, the fire department, we all met together on this. I got talked back into a wider road. 27 feet is your pavement. Then you have your curb, gutter, and pans. So you're 29 feet. So I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing because the fire department says you need at least 26 to get one side parking and the fire lane access for the apparatus. So we need to go to 26, and we picked the 27 feet because Kevin wanted 27 feet because he wanted to get to 29 feet with the curb pans. And so I thought, well, if we're going to get a wider street, then we possibly can do some more units than the 10. So I changed it to 20 and matched it with our subdivision numbers. Here's a term, regardless. You know, people complained about parking when they use private streets. You have to plan for visitor parking. We don't require visitor parking under our code right now. So in this provision, you'll plan for it at half a stall per unit. And you have to plan that your street can do it unless the commission approves an alternative plan where they're putting some minor parking areas in for the visitor parking. But now we have added a ratio for visitor parking. Sidewalks, that's the tension. Do we really always want sidewalks on both sides of the street when we have integrated open space? I think in some sense we can provide one development that connects on one side of the street and provide alternative paths winding through and connecting to the public street out on the public road and to the sidewalk system on their internal road. So I think that's still a good design principle is to be flexible. But right now we're saying both sides of the street unless you're approved with an alternative plan. And then the caveat is you're going to take care of it. Let's remind you, you're supposed to set up and perpetually take care of it. And if there's any other fire code that might regulate it, we throw that out there. So sorry for the long wind, but there you go. Give us feedback and hit us hard. Or not hard, as the case may be.
Thank you, Corey. It has been a while coming, and appreciate your efforts on this. Questions for staff or comments? Let me just share with you one that Commissioner Wright left with me. She said she likes the idea of gradation, though I think calling a 4-unit per acre residential medium is silly. I'm sure she didn't mean that personally. It's pretty standard throughout the country that 4 units per acre is typically residential low. I think with the explanation that you've given tonight, though, that at first blush I thought the same thing as I read the staff report, but what you're really trying to do is design these for infill where you've got some other factors that really come into play here that would require a special designation that you don't otherwise have in residential law. So the other question I had as I was going through this is by designating the 4, 6, and 8, are we completely eliminating the possibility of 5, 7?
Yes. I don't know if that's good or bad, but yes, because, you know, part of it is that when can you cut a range down and we're not successful, and part of it is both Lisa and I hope Lisa will chime in a little bit, we're trying very hard to not get too close to the line of where it's being applied on a moment's basis based on a feedback or something. Lack of better terms, I like you, but I don't like you, so I hit you hard.
Yeah.
That's
just wanted to make sure that I
we are
wasn't
doing
missing
that.
something there. And then the last question I had is on the RM6 and the RM8, you use the term areas where groundwater may prohibit basement development.
Yes,
Why?
that comes out of the general plan language. When we talk about use of multifamily, PUDs, clustering subdivision, it calls out, look at areas of groundwater where we can cluster where basements are not feasible. So I'm actually pulling it from that residential
So
section.
is it like kind of a justification for using residential medium? And is it a valid justification?
Well, you know, to some degree, I think you could debate the merit. Look at the Porter Walton townhomes that first came in as an RL before it ever went to RM medium. So he actually got approved for conceptual subdivision, and it just could not be sold as a paper lot to any other developer. And the biggest issue associated with that is the groundwater basements associated with single family. But caveating that, you can do a patio home without a basement, and it's probably maybe a little bit more, even more affordable, but we just love our basements. But the residential section, if you read that section, the last 2 sections of the general plan are talking about groundwater issues. And so I'm using it as a justification for places where medium is a possibility.
Okay. Other questions for staff?
Corey, I have cited my own home frequently to the point where I think some of you are tired of hearing about my particular house.
No, I agree with your argument as we've discussed.
But as I look at it, my house doesn't really fit. I mean, it fits within this gradation, but right now it would fit in the RM6, and the RM6 says that the expected residential development style is for twin home lots. And
Bingo.
It does not call out single-family homes. And I think that we, as a city, would not want to discourage, you know, neighborhoods like mine, right? Which are, it's really like a 5 units per acre type of a development, right? But it's all still single-family housing. What would be your response of adding into this RM6 section a single-family home?
I think that's a great question, and that's a little bit in anticipation of you actually asking that. I said, let's debate that issue of what we expect.
Yeah.
Are we trying to be cut and dry, and how cut and dry? But my response would be, is if you're comfortable with a concept like that, you know, you take medium commercial, high commercial, very high commercial, and you often bump the medium to the high, and often bump most of the high to the very high, but you'll see high will start to drop off a few things on the back end of medium uses. And so I think you could treat 6 as in between that. You could treat it as the lower end is kind of this infill. Then 6 can be the higher units and that infill. And then go to the 8 and say single family home in the 8 wouldn't be appropriate, let it drop off. So I think you could do that.
Yeah, I recognize the way that you have it drafted wouldn't prohibit somebody from coming in with a single family residence. I just think if we are going to be drafting this to say that the expected style is, my preference would be to say that the expected style is anything from a single family, a slightly more dense single family residential area up to
I think that's a good point.
some greater density for more multifamily housing.
Thank you. Other comments?
I'm not a huge fan of the architectural design standards. I feel like you know, when you add more restrictions and more cost to the zone, there's a phrase that I've heard before that says zoning determines value, and to a large extent I think that's true. I think and that's not just talking about density, that's talking about a lot of things that incorporated with zoning, whether that's design standards or fees or different things associated with it. And so perhaps I'm biased for having to deal with that a little on the other end, but I feel like the requiring I mean, unless, Corey, am I reading this wrong? It seems as though for a building permit, you obviously would have to have an architect involved. Is this ordinance here calling for that at an earlier stage?
Yes, in the design and layout of the initial concepts, consulting with the architect. Often what you have is they come in with a footprint design and a concept. An example is the Legacy Trails, Fred Hale's project. When they came in with their concept, they had these ideas, but they didn't take it to the architect just did an elevation and schematics. When they actually took floor plans in the design, they started having change. This concept is to say, kind of reverse that. Let's get up front how this is going to integrate, make sure that the architect's not just looking at how you do the closets inside, but you have an expert eye looking in the contextual layout, where your engineer, they just draw square, rectangles, sometimes a triangle and a hexagon for their units.
How would that apply to a single-family homeowner? Let's say that I buy a 0.2 acre piece of property, right? I'm not part of a larger development. I've just purchased a 0.2 acre piece of property. So now I am a residential medium. I, as an individual homeowner, am now going to have to get this licensed professional architect and all drawings submitted for approval or permit to have the stamp. Is that something that I would already be required to do now if I build in a residential low area, or am I imposing an additional requirement on a single-family home builder that is not otherwise required under the code now?
Your single-family home, just in base to receive a permit, has to be designed by a professional because they have to go through and do your lighting and ventilation calculations. So the single-family home itself will go through an architect for the construction of the unit. What is absent in a single-family home right now in a regular single-family subdivision is if you want to build it and look like a hamburger, we don't really care. We actually had somebody propose that in Ogden. The home was going to look like a hamburger.
With windows? Interesting.
And what this is saying is if you're in the medium zone and you are developing a single family, you're going to come with the concepts for that single family.
You know, in a way, and I appreciate Logan's comments, but in a way, considering the issues surrounding residential medium that we've faced from time to time, I think architectural standards may make it more palatable, if you will, to some of the citizens that may be concerned with higher densities.
Yeah, I definitely think it makes it easier on the city's end.
Yeah. From the planner, I mean, I agree with Logan. I mean, they're balancing all of their purchase prices, who to the market, so it does occur some costs and some problems for them. My planning perspective is this is very common. We think density solves the problem when it's design that solves the problem. So if you get a really good or a really dense product designed right without the initial fear of change, you actually get positive feedback when it's designed right. If I cut that density down by a third and do it very poorly, it creates it. So the common thought pattern is density creates the problems, but you can solve those, and the better the design is, density starts drifting off into the background of concern.
Yeah, and we've seen that down on Fourth West. That's a good example. The design down there is very nice, and people use that sort of as the poster child for what you could have for higher density, and it's hard to argue about.
Yeah.
Other thoughts?
Corey, am I reading this right? Sorry, I'm just scrolling through it now and this caught my eye. So under the exterior design standards, it indicates that natural or natural appearing materials, such as stone, cultured stone, and wood, shall be the design gestures used in the architectural design in all primary buildings, and that substantial or prominent use of other things like synthetic stucco should be used sparingly. This is going to apply to single-family homes. So what this is saying is that any single-family home in a residential medium shouldn't be primarily stucco, like no half stucco, half brick, or half stucco, half rock. Am I reading that correctly?
You are.
I don't know that I like that.
And this is up for debate. I'm just picking parameters to start
Yeah.
with and let you go. I know that, you know, when you're looking at design, stucco is a product commonly used, but it's really not a great material for longevity in a project. You know, that's better today than it's been in the past. We used to have a lot of weeping problems, and it would destroy the woods and stuff inside the walls without the proper barriers and the weep holes and so forth. It's better today than it's ever been, but it's still, to a design, it's a little bit of a subpar product.
I just have seen an awful lot of it, including in some really nice new buildings, so.
But I'm not one that's gonna die on and say, you can't do stucco. I just started at a base, and I think you take it from there.
Like you said, it's easy to poke at the stuff that jumps out at you, right? I think that you did an excellent job in drafting up this, but my preference would be to ratchet it back on putting the ixnay on the stucco.
And I don't think that's unless you find it a seriously concerned to avoid it, I don't. Just a prominently stucco house, though, is not really that great of a design, and neither is just everything vinyl sided when you're talking about design principles.
So my 2 cents as a non-voting member, so take what you will. Obviously that it should be gradation and not granulation, but also that I don't feel comfortable calling 4 units an acre medium density, even though I understand what Corey is trying to do, incorporating different types of lower density housing. I think that should be done on the RL scale. One being because by definition in our general plan, low density is 0 to 4 and medium density is 5 to 8. So it's almost conflicting saying medium density is 5 to 8 and then having an RM4 to me is kind of almost conflicting. And then also because of the political tendency in this community to kind of constantly downzone whatever you ask for, I think that calling 4 units an acre medium density allows them to constantly kind of push down to that level. Just seeing in the few months that I've been here, that's happened a few times, or it's attempted to happen a few times, and calling an area like Pages Lane medium density, which could mean 4 and which could mean 8, which means very different things to different people. So I am still uncomfortable calling it medium at all, and I think the same definition should be considered in place, but in the RL, adding another level to RL maybe that has that types of housing, but not RM. So.
Yeah, the issue is we start out at 4 with the RM, and a permitted use is 4. So I agree with the theoretical point that 4 is not necessarily the same as the RL, but in our ordinances, our general plan starts at 4 for medium, and our permitted uses start at 4. So the issue is you would have to change that in its entirety if you want to, and pick a different starting zone for medium.
Could you draft I understand Cassie's comment, because I had the same concern, Dave, when I read through it as well. I thought, well, what's the difference between RM4 and, residential low? Are we talking apples and oranges? Or are we talking apples and apples just by different names,
I would
right?
say, I would say not, because your RM zones can be placed strategically adjacent, and you could do a 4-plex that fits better than an 8-plex.
So what about doing something like tweaking the definition of the residential low to say that where a residential low zone directly abuts, say, an RM6 or an RM8 zone, that in those areas, the expectation is that you would build in housing that serves as a transition area, right?
I see what you're saying,
I
but
don't
now
know if you
you're
could do
doing
it.
a substantial change in changing the RL to something it's not right now.
Got it.
And could we do it? Yes. But I don't know if the tolerance level is to take RL and move it to 5 units an acre or something like that.
Yeah, I think it almost begs for a separate designation. I was inclined to argue Cassie's point earlier, as was Becky apparently, but I see the need to have sort of a special designation that I think fits better under an RM designation than an RL.
What if you were to not call it an RM4 and you were to call, I mean, just, there is something to be said about the title of
Yeah,
something.
I
I think that it is
understand.
important. And so what if you call it an RLM transition zone? Or just, I mean,
Just call it an RM.
you know,
The
or-
RM zone, it starts at 4, but you could say base RM zone base. I mean, I don't know, it's tough because we just everything's divided and segmented that way. We're fundamentally changing those segments.
But is there a conditional use that would raise it? There isn't.
No, this is the idea that the city has already established.
We're doing away
that-
with the conditional
Yeah,
use.
the city's already established that 4 units an acre for RM is permitted. That's the issue. Do we want to take that away? And I think that's problematic given all the languages that exist in policy. I think, but I'm going to spin a little bit tangent to your conditional. Do we want to make RM6 and RM conditional, or are we just going to say, hey, let that be permitted too? Because remember, we've had this long discussion. CUPs are not really something we can say no, so we should decide what we like and stick to it. But that's an aggressive stance to take on 6 and 8 units an acre, to not have some check to the impact and just say, we're good with the impact at 6 and we're good with the impact at 8.
If they're permitted uses in those zones, isn't that exactly what you're doing?
No, because when you go to this table here,
Yeah.
gross density permitted is 4 units an acre no matter where you're at. But if 6 is used or an 8 is used, it's capped with a CUP.
Corey, I'm convinced, this is complicated, and I'm convinced this is a strategy for job security, because you can navigate it.
As I tell Cassie, I just make up the world. And nobody else understands it, but I can make it up.
And I have to field the questions that go along with it.
I know that the council really wants us to move forward on this relatively quickly, but frankly, there's a lot here to digest.
There is.
And I'm conflicted on a few, on several of these, and I want to get a better understanding by reading some other sections in the code. I'm inclined to table this and give us a little bit of time to research it.
Yeah, don't feel hurried by me. I'm just aggressively getting it to you.
Yeah,
and
you
then go
aggressively
from there.
got it to us, so noted. But this is pretty, I think it's well, let's just say it's challenging to get our head around in one session.
Yes.
It would also be nice if we could hear Becky and Kevin weigh in as well. And I would definitely I really appreciate Corey's explanation because it helps me solidify some questions that I had in my head. But I would love to be able to table it and come back and revisit it once I've had a chance to process.
Is that a motion?
I would move. So move.
Second, that's your third so move today.
I know. I am starting to trademark it, so.
It's been moved and seconded that we table this matter. Do we want to put any kind of time frame on it? Should we try to schedule it for the next
Can we get it on the next meeting?
year?
Yes, you
next
need
meeting?
a table because we need to host the public hearing at some point.
Yeah.
Do we host it?
We haven't opened it for public hearing.
So table it. to the next meeting.
Yeah,
At
table
least
to the next
At
meeting.
least read it more, at least host the hearing.
Yeah, did we schedule it as a public hearing tonight? You may want
It
to
is.
take public comment and then you can table
And
it.
then we can table it and
Yeah.
continue the public
back
hearing.
next.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks, Lisa, that's a good point. So this matter has been scheduled for public hearing. You've been listening to us for a long period of time. We'll open it up for the public if you'd like to weigh in on this, please. And thank you for your patience.
I'm James Graham. I'm the Porter Lane, the Bell property applicant. So, as far as Corey goes, I think he's the job security part. I think he holds all the cards on that, just so you know. So, as far as like all this, how to separate some of these zonings and stuff. One of my main comments is, and sometimes when you do PUDs and some of these townhomes that we're really talking about in these type of developments, the backyard's really important to some of these, especially millennials, people that have dogs, stuff like that. And sometimes I see a lot of these townhouse developments that, they're kind of punished because they have to put so much green space out there, but yet their backyard doesn't count towards that. And in reality, I know that there's like a 50-50 ratio I think you guys have in place for that, but I don't know if that has any application, but it'd be nice if some of those could apply to maybe one of these, R6 or R8 or something, that you actually, if you have backyards, provide large backyards for these townhomes, it would be kind of beneficial. So as far as, counting towards the green space, I should say. So that, and then as far as the Brighton development, I door knocked every single house in that development. I have at least 10 text messages and letters from all people that support townhomes in that development, luxury townhomes, and none of them wanted single family homes. They actually wanted those homes all tore down. I just wanted to mention that. So, and they obviously knew no one's gonna buy a single family home with storage units across the street, commercial on one side, high density on one side. I mean, your Home Depot in your backyard just didn't make any sense. So that's about all I have to say. There's a lot of stuff you guys have to work on here, and I want to let you guys do your job. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, hello again. Now, this won't be representing anybody. This is Buck Swaney for the record. I think just a couple of technical pieces of input that you may or may not be interested in, but I'll provide them anyway. The first is that in most cities now, something like an R4, R5, R6 structure is a little bit out of favor, and usually we'll have something instead like R1 6000, R1 or R16, R18, R110. The last number is the lot size, the minimum lot size. And so in Murray City, if you're interested in an analog, our single family low density goes all the way down to R18, which means 8,000 square foot lots as a minimum. And that, 8 times 5 is 40, so that's over 5 units per acre as an average. And that fits into low density in Murray. So you have to get down to 6,000, which is, what would that be, 6 times 7 is 42, so 7 units per acre before you hit the medium density level. All right, so that's useful perhaps for an analog. This argument that the R4 does not fit into medium density is, in my experience, pretty much broadly, widely correct. That is standard low density development at R14 level. So I think that merits real honest discussion here on the Planning Commission and with the City Council. One more thing, and purely constructively, is that the Utah Land Development Management Act that governs all that we do here in planning and zoning and so forth has a place where it allows us to create conditional uses. However, I'm a little bit, I would just, Corey, what you propose with these acceptable uses that have conditions kind of quacks like a duck and walks like a duck. And I would just make sure that it received legal review to make sure that it wouldn't be interpreted later as a conditional use type of provision that's trying to walk as something else. So just for the care of making sure that this is bulletproof legally, I would make sure that that receives a pretty careful review.
That's why we have our attorney here.
But I have also raised my concern about
Yes.
making density a CUP. So I agree.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's not a fun analysis under a conditional use permit for density.
Yep, it's problematic.
So my first question to Corey was, are we getting rid of that?
Well,
But the CUP does allow review of the traffic and some of the architecture and some of the relationship to the next door neighbors, so.
Sure.
It has worked for Centerville.
Right. And that's why I brought up the issue. Are you comfortable with just going with the 6? You know, right now, the structure is 5 to 8. And we know how problematic 5 to 8 is. That's much more subjective to the legal question, because you really can't say you're 5, you're 6, and you're 8. You just really can't say that. This is correcting it maybe at a 50% cut to be a better definitive than the range. But I still agree with Lisa. We're still struggling with this, you know, CUP. But I really think that the tolerance level of the city at this point, if you're going to do a gradation, I don't think that the community tolerance is to make 8 units a permitted zone, regardless of the legal argument. And so if that's the case, then the choice of the development community is the city will cut that to 4, and we'll just live with a hard line at 4. May not be economically feasible, it may not be desirable, it may not ever get built, but I think this is a balance between the political tension and the law, is that I don't think we're going to go to 8 as a permitted use, but under a conditional use, we might be able to design it, look at the impacts, the public gets satisfied that we vetted that, and you get an 8. But if you go to a permitted, I don't think we're going to get there. So this is that balance.
Yeah, and I think actually the elected officials are coming to the conclusion that with the CUP, it's not an opportunity to deny the density, it's an opportunity to mitigate any proven negative impacts. So that's really all this analysis is allowing us at those density levels.
So, yeah, so I just hate to drive it to where we're going to be absolutely black and white with the risk management concerns. And just cut it down in its entirety, because then the counter argument is we're not looking at our moderate income housing plan and providing a variety of housing and opportunities because we're so fearful of the permitted uses. Where if you make it conditional, it has that element of tension under the law, but it also has the ability to be vetted in the public process. And if we can get it because CUPs are to be approved as long as they're vetted and mitigated, then we actually provide more moderate or opportunities for moderate income housing than going to a straight permitted.
Thank you. So, thank you for your comments. We have a motion on the table here for tabling this particular item. And I assume if we table it at this point, Lisa, we can also continue the public hearing? Or,
Yes, if you'd like. And if you'll direct staff which way you prefer, you can table it and continue the public hearing.
So is that part of your motion?
Yeah, I would go ahead and table it, but continue the public hearing.
Okay. Have a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further comment or debate? Not, we'll go ahead and vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Matter is tabled. Thank you. Thank you for your comments.
Yes.
You have an upcoming meeting, yay. You want to go home?
No, we got minutes to
One
go
more.
through.
Oh, we forgot the minutes. I forgot the minutes.
Most important part of the night.
Yeah, I forgot those.
So pull out your minutes from the meeting of August 23rd, 2017. And just go through these. Any changes on page 1? Page 2? Page 3? Page 4, I have a comment. Beginning on line 22, we'll just actually start on line 21. Chair Hershey expressed a preference for taking a conservative approach. Probably said that. I'm generally conservative, but I think it doesn't really say what I meant. So I'd like to add these words. I'll just read the whole sentence. Chair Hershey expressed a preference for taking a conservative approach on parking at this point in order to allow for future development options in the area. Any issue with that? Anything else on page 4? Page 5? Page 6?
On page 6, line 45, Quick Quack Care Wash, I think that should be car.
Good catch. Although they do take good care of your car.
They do take good care of your car, so maybe that's what we meant.
Anything
If
else
that's
on?
the case, we need to change it on page 7.
Anything else on page 6? Page 7. Page 8. 9. 10. 11. I have one proposed change on line 42, where the clause that says Chair Hershey said he feels scenario 3 would offer the most opportunity for both the city and developer. I may have said that, but I think the record should reflect landowners, city, and developer there. And so I would strike the word both and add the word landowners before the word city. Any objection? Hearing none, we'll move on. Page 12.
Yeah, I have a comment on line 42. It reads, Commissioner Johnson said he feels if the city wants a park, the city should purchase the full 6 or 7 acres for a park. And then in between that sentence and the next, I feel like it would better reflect what I was saying if it said, alternatively, if the city were to allow residential development, he said it makes most sense to give developer tools to develop the whole site. So add that line, alternatively, whatever I just said. Did you get all that? Let me try again. Okay, good. Thank you.
Any comment to that? As a general comment, does anybody feel concerned about the word feel in these minutes? Seems like we're all feeling a lot. I think maybe the better term is believes. I'm wondering if we could suggest a global change to where we use the word feel to change the word to believe.
Just quick review. I don't think I said feel, so I'm down with that.
Except for just a minute ago. You feel like.
Would you add that to be believe instead of feel in a minute? Thanks.
We okay with that?
I feel that that would be an acceptable proposal.
Thank you. Any other changes? Chair will entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve the minutes as amended.
Second. Oh, yeah.
I'll second at once. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm abstaining from not being
Oh,
here.
okay. Thank
Can I make a comment and suggest that perhaps for future meetings that we consider putting the approval of planning minutes to the end of the proceedings? It seems like a lot of times people are sitting here waiting for us to get through these. And I don't have any objection to doing it at the end of the meeting. I don't know if we have a reason for doing it at the beginning, but it seems like it works fairly smoothly at the end.
Yeah, we have less comments because
We have
everybody's tired.
fewer
Is that-
comments. I don't know, just something to
I'm
consider.
fine with that. Do you want to propose that we make an agenda change to that effect?
Yeah, I would make a proposal that we make an agenda change to that effect.
I'll
Is that-
second it.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. We move the review of the minutes to the end of each meeting, just before the developers report.
Yeah.
Yes, just before the developers report.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you, good suggestion. Now we turn to the most exciting part of our program.
We got you another meeting. We got you job security, so
Okay. What do we got on tap?
we got Legacy Commons. That's the, let's see, northwest corner of 1250 West and Parish. You saw this earlier in a preliminary form, and this was the idea of bumping up to the council to get some feedback. Well, they bumped it back down and said, well, finish out the project and come with a recommendation. So you're seeing that come back before you. And then Moss Acres, if you recall, 1825 North Main,
2025,
or 2025, where is 18?
with the historic site on it.
Oh,
That subdivision that was rezoned to RL, that, well, the property rezoned to RL, they're bringing in a
is that on
subdivision.
the west side, Maine?
East side.
Is it the east side?
2026, technically.
It's the, you see a few retaining in that older home
Oh, yeah,
setback.
okay. Yeah, I know what it is.
And then newly added
And we'll
text.
be adding the tabled item.
Tabled item, and then I think Cass is right, we got a
A zoning text amendment to allow catering in CM zones.
professional catering.
Okay, very good. Thank you all for your help. Thank you, staff. Thank you, commissioners. I move we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Adjourn.